Welcome to the Product Breakfast Club. I'm Jake, and I am a designer and writer. This is
the Product Breakfast Club.
No, you're supposed to say your name. You're supposed to say your name.
Oh, that's so good. I forgot you said the Product Breakfast Club already. Please keep this in. I'm Jonathan Courtney. I'm a total dumbass, obviously, and I'm the co-founder of Aj&Smart, now the CEO. And I didn't write a New York Times best-selling book, unfortunately. One day.
John and I met about a year ago, and it's kind of an interesting time that's going on for us right now. I left my job a few months ago and am trying to make a go of it as a full-time writer and making money by teaching workshops on sprints and doing some advising with companies. John, meanwhile, is the CEO of this. Basically, it's a startup. It's a design agency that is rapidly growing over the past 12 or so months. And we have these regular calls where we kind of talk and exchange notes and kind of find ways to work together and give each other advice and heckling each other. And we decided to start recording those in these podcasts. It's a new year now. It's 2018. And we're going to try a new experiment with the podcast where we do a little bit of structure, at least for an episode or two, to see how it goes. Today, we're going to be experimenting with sharing our call. So a 10-minute kind of status update where we talk, which is going to be less boring than it sounds, I think, where we talk about what's new in the design agency world with John, what's new in the writing a book world with me. And then we're going to get into our topic of the day.
And the topic itself is usually focused around something related to the product world, innovation processes, productivity processes. I mean, the podcast is called the Product Breakfast Club. So sometimes we do also talk about breakfast. That could be the topic of today.
Yeah, it could be, but we don't know yet. We won't know for
That's
10
the thing.
more minutes.
Yeah.
So I'm setting my time timer for 10 minutes, and we're going to do our status update, 10 minutes. John, you're just back from the holidays. What's new with Aj&Smart?
So, I mean, actually, I haven't started work yet. Tomorrow is the first official. I know, it's Europe.
Slackers.
It's Europe. It's great. So I took 2 weeks off to just recalibrate, to chill, and to reflect a little bit on the year. And today was my first day really of sitting down and starting to set what I actually want to do for 2018 with Aj&Smart. I mean, the company grew, like you mentioned, it actually more than doubled in 2017. And it's brought with it a lot of different challenges. And so 2018 is going to be crazy. I mean, we're starting off tomorrow. Myself and my co-founder, Michael, are kicking off with a coach. Because actually we just are not, even though we are two founders, we still are lacking a lot of knowledge when it comes to growing a company. And so tomorrow we're going to be spending the entire day with a coach from Manchester. His name is Sean, and he's been super helpful for us in terms of how to grow the company, how to structure a company like this. We didn't need any structure when we were like two people. And also how to be honest, a lot of it is going to be how to grow the revenue and profit while keeping the quality up and the quality of life up. So that's me tomorrow. And then on Friday, the entire company comes back to work. So it's just myself and my co-founder tomorrow. Friday, we all come back. And on Monday, we start off with our design sprints with a couple of cool new brands and cool new companies. That's it, man.
You're not going to say what those are. Those are going to be secret. Those are secret.
I think that most of them are not allowed to be talked about, but
okay,
you can always find out eventually.
Yeah, well, we'll assume that that's something amazing. So, what do you guys like? You have big initiatives for 2018 that you already know, even before you talk to Sean. It can't be a blank slate.
No, it's not a blank slate. So I think in like late November, myself and my co-founder sat down with Sean again, and there are two different things. So I am the CEO and he's the managing director. We're both 50-50 owners, though. But we decided to split the types of roles that we have. So we have different tasks for 2018. One of my tasks for 2018 is obviously to increase the revenue. So we're aiming to double it again. But this time, this year I spent a lot of money, actually. Also, as you may have known from all the San Francisco trips. So our profit margin was down around 12%, which is quite normal for agencies during a growth phase. But I'm trying to drag that up to around 20% this year. Who knows, though? I mean, with the hiring that I'm going to be doing, it might be a bit tricky. So I'm going to be working on that. I'm going to be working on building out the training business, the education business of Aj&Smart, which in itself is going to be a multi-million euro business, totally accidentally. So up until now, we were just building products, and that was our main business. We were a product design company, and now the education thing just took off. Also thanks to us working together and doing these design sprint boot camps and things like that. So that's going to be a huge part of it, and I'm obviously going to be traveling a lot because of it. And Michael, my co-founder, he's going to be working on how to structure this new beast of a company into something that's a bit more efficient, because right now, I would say that we are still in a very reactive state. People are still not 100% clear about what their roles are because of our bad management. And that's like one of the biggest challenges, is like how to manage this machine that is now Aj&Smart, which used to be, like 2 freelancers. So that's
So it's one of the reasons why we wanted to experiment with this idea of the status updates. These are conversations that you and I normally have, but usually before we hit record.
Yeah, exactly.
And so I think it's kind of cool sometimes in a podcast. I enjoy the storyline. I enjoy like week after week hearing the story evolve. We're not gonna do any investigative journalism like Serial or anything, but but we can just tell the story of what's like actually really happening. And it's pretty compelling for me to hear what's been going on with you guys as you've been figuring this out, because it's changed a lot in the year that we've known each other. Just to catch up the audience at home, what was kind of, you guys started off as a straight up like digital design agency doing big projects, and switched over to doing design sprints almost 100%. But the education thing you mentioned kind of just grew, sort of by accident. You said by accident. Like, what was the seed of that? Because later on today, we're going to talk about making decisions, taking risks, trying new things. It's going to be a topic, I think, that recurs for us for a while.
Yeah.
How did that start for you?
Well, the way that started was we were doing a lot of product design work for companies. So we were helping them to build and release their products more from a design and strategy point of view. And a lot of the companies we were working with, even before we were doing the sprint, they would ask us like, hey, can you teach our employees how to do what you just did? And they would keep asking us. And because I'm kind of like a salesperson, I guess that's my thing. I eventually I just said, yeah, sure. Yeah, we'll teach you how to do that in a 2-day workshop. I had no idea what the 2-day workshop was going to be. I came up with some sort of a price that I didn't know that they'd accept, and they did. And then we booked the date for it. And I think that was literally last summer. So we booked like a 2-day slot where some company was going to come in and we were going to help them, and I think we called it the like 2-day innovation booster pack or something like that. And I remember like the week before, opening up Keynote and being like, okay, so I'm going to make this training thing now, and I made something which involved like every mix of everything you can possibly imagine, and the company loved it, and they actually booked they tried to book us for the entire year workshop, because they were like a 30,000 person company. They tried to just constantly book us every day for those workshops, and I was like, there's maybe a business here. But because I was so focused on getting the product design part of Aj&Smart right, I didn't focus on it at all. So I never talked about it. We never advertised it. It was always just word of mouth. If someone asks, we'll say, okay, we do it. And then we went for it. And then at the start of this year, we formalized it, I guess. We made that into okay, we do now training. We put a tab on our website that said training. And we started doing things like the boot camp that we've done with you, like training people how to do the design sprint, and a few other experiments that we ran. And it was still a side project until September this year, when we took the company to Mallorca, which is in Spain, here in Europe. And we did an entire week in this beautiful villa. And one of the things that came out of it was, or one of the things that I wanted to talk to everyone about was, maybe we should think about this training business as a serious thing. And the reason is, I was looking at the numbers for the year, and I literally clicked and dragged over the revenue for the training. And I was expecting I was expecting $250,000 or something, side project sized amount of revenue. And then I looked and it was what the hell? How do we make that much money with training this year? And so I sat down with Michael, and I sat down with Danny, and I sat down with Dee and Venla, and I was just we need to actually take this thing seriously. And so that's one of the first initiatives that are starting in Aj&Smart next week, is that we, for the first time ever, have a dedicated training team that does nothing but grow. That is nothing to do besides growing the education and training business. Whereas, and Dee used to be a little bit here, a little bit on this project, a little bit on that project. And from next Monday, she's purely on building the education company. So it's a pretty big deal for us. We're going to invest a lot of money into it. And it may even break off as its own company, as its own entity with its own name, in just also to make it easier for us to account for having budgets for a team like that. And yeah, that's one of the really big things that are going to happen next year, just because people wanted to buy something that we weren't selling yet.
Yeah, that's super interesting. So you saw it at first. I mean, you knew that people were into it after you ran that first training. Yeah. But you didn't like immediately say, let's fund this thing. It kind of caught you by surprise.
I didn't really. First of all, I'm not a person who's trained in business or economics or whatever. So I didn't really understand how important it could be. The only reason I did it, the only reason I accepted the clients doing these education programs with us, because I wanted them to buy product design things from us. So I just saw it as a sales tool. And in fact, I put a lot of effort this year into doing a lot of free events, like I did in the WeWork a couple of weeks back in San Francisco. Last year, we can say now. And that was more, for me, it was more like here's what we're like. It's a low entry of cost, and you can see how Aj&Smart works. And now you can book us for the bigger thing. But now it's like, wait a second. Like, training is actually a very good thing. Number one, of course, it does find you new clients, and it is a lower barrier to entry, but it's also a really great way to, I'm not going to walk around it. It's a good way to make money. It's a good way to make profit.
Yeah.
And it's also really fun.
What are the big challenges for making that work, do you think, in the next 3 to 6 months?
A lot of challenges. Number one is that, and this is fair to the team is new. It's a new team. Yeah. It's going to be very difficult for them. I've already spoken to the three. It's actually Dee, Danny, and Venla. So it's only 3 people right now. They're going to have a lot of difficulty figuring out exactly what their role is within those teams. We've kind of set out what the roles are, but those always change once you figure out what you're really good at and what you're maybe not so comfortable with doing. So I think there's going to be some messiness there in terms of who is responsible for what are the roles, what are the priorities, and I'm trying to avoid intervening on that process so that it does feel like its own business that's growing. But I know from building the marketing team in Aj&Smart this year, it takes a lot longer than you think to get a team to gel together. So I think just prioritizing and understanding what to do first and moving from step to step is going to be difficult. And because the training business is a huge project, just even things like the website for it, the content for each course, how much do we charge? How often do we do it? Who do we need to hire to moderate these things if we do too many? How do we do we do international? All of these kind of things are very, very complex once you sit down to do them, and it's going to be difficult for that team to figure out what the priorities are. And so we're going to try to help them, but it's going to be messy. There's no way around it. It's just going to be messy.
Will you mostly be doing them in, for those of you listening to the podcast for the first time, we should say this in the intro. You are in Berlin.
I'm in Berlin.
I'm in San Francisco. John's in Berlin. Aj&Smart's in Berlin. Are these mostly going to be in Germany? Is that where they're the heart of the market for you?
We would love them to mostly be in Germany because it makes it super easy for us, but I don't think they will be. I mean, Germany is where our main base is and our main training base is. So a lot of clients will, I hope it's around 80% of clients flying to us because we make the environment so nice and we make it really worth flying over. But as you know, we're going to be in the US a lot this year as well. So that's going to be, I think it's going to be, apart from the European tour that we're doing, which is going to be the Nordics and some other countries, I think it's going to be mostly Berlin and San Francisco. And hopefully that's 80% Berlin, 20% San Francisco.
That's cool. Okay. So to get that gelling of the team, and then we'll stop because I think we're running over our 10-minute stand-up time. But to get that, do you think is the best way just for them to like get reps just to do it? Like, what do you do as you're the leader, you're the CEO? Like, how do you get that team going?
The first thing, they do have an advantage that the MVP of this training business was this year, and it was already a successful business. And this year it was run without a team, with mostly me saying, hey, let's do a training here, or let's go to San Francisco and let's do this. So up until this point, it was mostly me just kind of randomly saying, let's do something. So they do have the advantage of an entire year and a half's worth of testing, and they've been part of the testing. They've been in those testing teams. And I think now the problem is going to be, or let's say now the difficult thing to do is going to be figuring out how to do that without guidance, necessarily without daily guidance from me, for example. They're going to be on their own for most of the year. And I think what my role in that is to just be extremely clear with what I want for Aj&Smart as a business, like as the bigger picture. And this does include revenue targets for the training team. And I think that those are things where it's about, the revenue targets, it's about how our brand is perceived. And those are things I try to make extremely clear and not fuzzy, so that they're not trying to guess around. I guess I set a few principles that the team can then, test against. But I mean, in the first few months, like I mentioned, it will be very, very hands-on from my side and from Michael's side, just to get the ball rolling and just to have this team being self-contained. And even just to try to figure out, they're going to be hiring people now, which they haven't done before, right? I was the one hiring people to do training, and now they will have that responsibility. So it's a lot of new things happening, and we'll see what works and what doesn't. And I'm sure we'll find some gaps where we'll need to hire some more people for that team.
Cool. Well, I know what our topic is today, and I have a feeling we'll be referencing this again as we come back to it.
Sure.
I'm not going to give a full status update because I burned up the whole time asking you questions because it was so interesting. But I am going to tease. I'll give a teaser for the next episode about my status. I mean, it's nothing exciting, but where I'm at right now is writing this. I'm finishing up this book that I've written with my one of my co-author of Sprint, John Zaratsky. And we're in the phase now where we're waiting for the copy edits to come back. And when the copy edits come back, it's like your last chance to make changes to the book. So when the copy editor is looking for everything, grammar, spelling, all that stuff, when you get the document back from the copy editor, you can kind of sneak in some more changes to the manuscript in that last revision as you look through the copy edits. And to prepare ourselves for that, to kind of do the best job possible, we've shared the book with a bunch of people. We shared it, we sent out a link to the Sprint mailing list, which is like 28,000 people. And I got and I kind of buried the link in there. So, I didn't want everybody to sign up, but we got about 1,000 people who signed up and are in this Google Doc, split half of them giving comments in the Google Doc, half of them in a view-only Google Doc with a survey at the end, so we get different kinds of data. And over the next couple weeks, I'm kind of waiting for maybe doing one more little sweep to pull in the last of those responses from people, and then trying to see if there's anything I can glean out of there. And actually already there are some little things that are little tweaks I can make to make it better. So that's what's going on right now, is we're kind of just locking down the book and getting ready to launch. But I can talk about that more in a future episode, because it's been, for me, an interesting experience in collecting data in a different way, and seeing if that kind of data is useful. And I think it is, but you have to be careful with it. Anyway, we can talk about that.
Can I still ask you a question? I don't know if you really want this to be in the podcast, but let's see. Hopefully you do want it to be in the podcast, because I think it's interesting. For you writing books like this, what's your, if you think about it, okay, great, you're getting the knowledge out there, yada, 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 and very nice for you, very nice for your audience. But for you, is it also in the back of your head that doing something like this increases your day rate, is locking something in for the future? What is for you, at least from a pure, one person business or freelancer perspective, why is it that you do that? I know you have a passion for writing, great, but what do you actually, what is your let's say financial game in that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think that if we go back in time and look at writing Sprint, I didn't realize what writing a book like that could do for you, for like an individual. And so the I mean, definitely the difference in the way when I have a conversation with someone who's read the book or heard of the book, and then meets me for the first time, or from talking to somebody at a business or something, they definitely are like, oh, like you're like a book writer, and like nothing materially changed in terms of my brain or my capability before or after. So it's pretty funny to have that experience, because there is something magic about a book, and there's something magic about it being a book that that in some cases product teams have heard of. So that did have an effect on what I could charge for a workshop, for a ticket to a workshop, for example. I mean, definitely, like it made the design sprint a thing, and it put my name in a different light, I think, for people. I did not anticipate that ahead of time. I knew that it would be cool. Like I knew that it would be, I'm not going to, lie to you and say like I was like, oh, I just wanted to write the book, and I had no thought of like self-interest. I wanted to make money off of the book itself, and I hoped that it would be a boost to me personally, to my career in some way. But I think this idea that you can afterwards, after you've written a book, that you can give talks or give trainings or something in a similar way to what you described with Aj&Smart, I didn't really anticipate that in advance. Now with the new book, it's funny because I know that now. I know that a successful book can have that kind of an effect. The new book doesn't build on the ideas of the old book, really. I mean, it's similar to some of the philosophies of Sprint in terms of using some structure and breaking down how you use your time, but it's for individuals. It's not for teams. It's not for businesses necessarily. And so I don't have this like dotted line A to B about how I personally, or me and John, my co-author, like how we sort of monetize that in the future. I don't have like a business strategy for it. Honestly, I think more than anything, it's a topic that I was pretty excited about, and I just felt like there was the book that I wanted to read about this stuff was kind of missing. Okay. And I really wanted to write that book. And in a way that was kind of with Sprint in a different way. I was like, man, this book is missing. I really want to write it. And with my novel, which it's a whole other topic, but it was also like a case where I was like, oh, this book is missing. I guess I should just write it. And I have to admit to being a little bit naive and bumbling in this, and kind of like, we'll see what happens. But my plan is actually to just keep doing Sprint workshops, keep talking about that. I hope that there will be an opportunity to talk about the new stuff too, but they don't really fit. There's no master plan. So we'll see.
Great. So you're just going to be a trillionaire basically after the new book comes out. That's what you're saying.
Yeah, right.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly that.
So when is the book coming out actually? When are you like done?
It comes out late September it's when it's actually published. It takes basically forever. We're talking now in January, early January. We will officially announce it at the end of this month. It'll be like you can pre-order on Amazon at the end of January, but it won't actually hit the real world until the end of September. So
can I ask you actually another question? I know that you really wanted to keep this first section really short.
You're killing me.
Would you consider doing I think that Sprint, at least from my perspective, Sprint is more popular now than it was when it first came out in terms of word of mouth. People are actually talking about the design sprint. Maybe the book is not selling as much as it did at the very start, but a lot of people know about it today compared to how many people knew about it 1 year ago. Would you consider doing like a book of case studies on sprints, or like a follow-up to Sprint, which is heavily focused on case studies and learnings about it? Maybe not as a big published release, but maybe as like an ebook or something like that? You could make a lot of money off that, like easy dough.
I don't know. I think that there's definitely a need for a hey, here's all the things that I've learned, even in the past 2 years, about the process that make it better. And some of the stuff comes from things you guys have done at Aj&Smart, and some of it comes from just talking to people. Some of it are things that I like. We always, we would always write down a metric. You were just talking about giving your teams a metric to to follow. And that's so important. We always did that at Google Ventures right after we had the long-term goal at the beginning of the sprint. If people who are listening are sprint nerds, you'll know that you start with the metric and then you start with the long-term goal and then you get into your sprint questions. We would always do a metric right after that.
Right.
And we decided to not include it in the book because conversations about metrics it's a hard topic to just hand wave about and go quickly through. But in hindsight, I think we should have talked about it because I think it helps the process a lot. It helps teams to be thinking about that when they get ready to make decisions. So there are a long list of little tweaks like that, and like little tweaks and big tweaks that might make for an interesting kind of follow-up. But I think it almost could be like a good long blog post. I do think that maybe eventually, if the book continues to sell well, maybe there'll be interest in some number of years in doing like a revised and updated version. Yeah. And I do think there's some really cool case studies out there that would love to add in so that it's not just startups. Because I think sometimes one of the hesitations people have is like, well, how do I do this at my big company? Or how does a company kind of adopt this? I've heard those stories. You've seen those things happen. I think there's some great stories that could be told, but I do not feel like writing a book is a really big undertaking. And it's also really hard to write a follow-up to a book and have it be as impactful. And this is true with like movies and movie sequels and like, novels and sequels to novels. And it's totally also true with, if you think about like a business book and trying to write a sequel to a business book, it's really hard. That's just because it still feel fresh.
Yeah, but it's also because you don't write your blog post like I write mine, which is I sit down for 1 hour, it's full of mistakes, and then I press publish, and then you get angry. So it's
yeah, that's right.
Maybe you're just thinking about it the wrong way.
I might be.
All right, great. So let's very nicely transition into our topic of the week, and maybe this is, if you're listening to the podcast version of this, it could be that at this very moment that you're listening to it, that our lovely editor Jason has somehow maybe put some music in between, or while I'm talking right now, or something has happened to make it sound like there's a transition. But if you're on YouTube, you ain't getting shit. YouTube is raw, baby, as raw as it gets. All right. So, Jake, I want to talk to you about something. I want to talk to you.
Okay.
I want to talk to you about a donkey. Do you know what a donkey is? Is it the same word in the US as it is here?
In the US, we say ass.
Okay, so an ass, great. So have you ever heard of, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing this correctly, Buridan's ass? Just say no.
We actually say donkey. I have heard of it because I read the article that you sent me the link to this morning.
Just say no, Jake. So
no, I've never heard of it.
Perfect. What is great. It? So it's like basically, the story goes, okay, it's a story. It's a very long, serious story, yeah. That there's this donkey, right? There's this donkey, and he's standing in a field between two bales of hay. Hay is like dried grass. You guys wouldn't know about it. So between two bales of hay.
I know what hay is. Come on.
And he can't decide which one to eat because they're both the same, and it's a very difficult choice. He just doesn't know like the left one or the right one. Which one should I eat? Which one's like maybe that one's a bit more delicious? And basically, the donkey starves to death. What's the moral of the story?
God.
What's the moral of the story, Jake? Making any decision would have been better than making no decision is the moral of the story. And
didn't somebody just nudge a bale of hay closer to the donkey?
Because I think this guy Buridan or whatever his name is, he was just a total douche, and he just wanted to see what would happen if he had two perfectly juicy looking bales of hay standing in between. Do you remember the other day like a few podcasts ago we were talking about kids in the field? This is reminding me of it. Why is every creepy story related to fields? So anyway,
I grew up in a rural part of the United States. I grew up on a farm, and I'm familiar with donkeys. And donkeys are smart, man. There's no way that this would happen. This presumes that donkeys are idiots.
This is a new story.
I get the metaphor that you're laying out for me, but I question the premise of the donkey. Anyway, we should keep going. I don't think people want to hear any more farm animal knowledge being dropped.
That's all right, man. That's all right. So
I'm going to stand up for the donkeys.
The donkeys do not know what they're doing, all right? They can't make decisions. So the point here, and I guess the topic that I want to bring up today was triggered by two things. Number one, I'm reading this really great book that I think everyone's reading at the moment. It's called Principles by Ray Dalio. I'm holding it up to the screen for anyone.
I'm not reading it.
Yeah, everyone's reading it, all right?
Tell me about it.
I'm
reading a pretty cool book called We Are Legion, We Are Bob.
Let's get back to that later. Oh, I have that book on my Kindle. I didn't start reading it yet.
Don't start because you won't be able to stop.
Oh, no. I have so many books to read right now. I'm reading whatever. It doesn't matter. So it was triggered by Ray Dalio's book Principles, which is a really, really interesting book, which is a set of principles for life and a set of principles for work by the super successful, I don't know, fourth richest man in the world who runs Bridgewater Associates or something like that. I don't know. He's one of these people who's on every podcast. You know those people. And it's really, really interesting. And it goes deep into detail about his decision-making systems and processes and algorithms, because he, at least for this guy, making decisions is just an extremely important skill. Being good at making decisions and being fast at making decisions is extremely important. And then I saw this article, which I sent to you this morning, which is called The Hidden Cost of Indecision. And now I read this article a long time ago, Jake. You just read it this morning. But I really wanted to talk about it because it talks about the hidden cost of, well, as you can probably guess, it talks about the hidden cost of indecision. And it's written, I just want to give some credit to Geoffrey Keating from Intercom, an Irish company, who wrote this article, because I think it's very short, really nicely edited, and just a nice punchy read, unlike every single thing that I write. And the idea is, and what it goes into, is that being unable to make decisions and being paralyzed by having too many decisions and not just going for something can be very damaging to a company. And if a company agonizes over every decision, so some decisions are tough, some decisions you really do have to research and you have to figure out, should we actually do this if it's going to be a big investment. But a lot of companies, and a lot of companies I've worked with, and I will also say this includes Aj&Smart, a lot of companies have trouble making decisions, even when it's something very small. And that's something where some alarm signs should start going off. Alarm sounds sounds better. So when you walk in to a company and people are having trouble figuring out maybe what paper to order, or, where should we go for lunch, or, like these small insignificant things, you can all very, very often extrapolate that to how they're actually going to work on products or how they're going to work on more difficult things. A lot of the time, companies are so used to talking through decisions or putting them off, like saying, let's talk about this next week, or let's talk about this at the next hands-on, or let's just like put this on the back burner for now. People are getting so used to that in companies who are very, very, let's say, unable to make decisions, that they get this overall paralysis for making any decision. And this article goes into really nice detail about why that's damaging and why sometimes just making any decision is better than making no decision at all. And I think that this topic, at least for me, reading it and seeing it as simply laid out as that, just, instead of analyzing option A and instead of analyzing option B, which might take 2 months, let's just choose option A, see what happens. And if it doesn't work out, let's choose option B, see what happens, and then learn from both of those things. And for me, this really comes back to the sprint as well, where the sprint is like, let's just go for something, let's see what happens, instead of thinking about it, creating a vision document for 3 months, and then trying to go for it. So this, for me, was a really interesting topic, just about how companies and how people and how organizations and how teams make decisions or don't make decisions. That's it.
Yeah, it is an interesting topic, and I have to say the article you sent to me this morning, it didn't do a lot for me. It brought up the topic, and it's an interesting topic.
Brings it up. It's a cute one.
There's a I think maybe it's meant to be a joke in the article, but it looks like kind of a spurious argument to me, which is a bar chart, and it says Basically, it's like option A, and it looks like option A would take like an hour. Option B, and it looks like option B would take an hour. And then it's like talking about it, and it's like 20 hours or something. And I think it's a joke. It's hard. It's a little hard to tell if it's meant to be a joke, but like the reality of the decisions most people make is that in companies that are meaningful is that they're talking about a much bigger investment than 1 hour. And so, I don't think you can overread in the example of like how do we decide where to go get lunch, because a lot of these decisions are really weighty. And I think that to say that building a feature, and this is another argument from the article, building the wrong feature or running the wrong marketing campaign isn't costly. It can be very costly, especially if you're a startup. It can be very costly to invest a lot of time and money in something that doesn't work, because you only have so many shots before you kind of find success. So in the sprint process, and one thing that you do, I know, outside of the sprint process, one thing that I try to help teams do, even outside of the sprint process, is make decisions in a sort of systematic way and in a fast way, in a way that's appropriate to the scope of how weighty the decision is that they're taking on. But all that said, I think I would definitely agree that I have seen teams and been a part of teams who were paralyzed by indecision and who fell apart eventually over, who the product fell apart or was greatly delayed by indecision. And one of those, and it's probably a story I've told before on the podcast, so I won't tell it in great detail, but working at Microsoft, we were working on a product that was kind of we were kind of starting to start up a product from scratch, like an incubation product within the company. And we went back and forth on sort of the form that the product should take. This was meant to be basically like a touchscreen device for the home. This was right before the iPhone came out. So it seemed like a very novel idea, and it turned out to be a very, promising product space, but Microsoft never got there. And this particular thing we were working on, we could not, as a team, agree what the form of the thing should be. We couldn't get onto a shipping cycle. We just couldn't. We were just basically indecision killed us. And so I've seen that happen there. I saw at Google, we worked a long time on what eventually became Google Hangouts before we could get the leadership to agree, like, yes, you can launch it in this sort of a form. And this was at a time when Larry and Sergey and Eric Schmidt were kind of like, you didn't really know exactly who was in charge. Eric Schmidt at that time was the CEO, but everybody was kind of like, you can kind of, the teams were encouraged to make their own decisions, but you also kind of had to listen to those three. And it wasn't always clear if you were starting something new, how you got it launched. And we really kind of were in purgatory for a long time with that product before it eventually caught on and launched weirdly as part of Google Plus, which was like a really weird kind of outcome for it. But it stuck around, and it's kind of persisted even despite that once it got out in the real world. But the basic thing I've seen work well is when teams have some kind of a system for making big decisions. And the team that I was a part of was really high functioning on making decisions, I thought, was Gmail. This was a long time ago. This is like, I worked on Gmail in like 2007, 2008, 2009. So we're talking about like a decade ago almost. But Gmail hasn't really changed much in a decade. So you can kind of, those decisions have been probably pretty good. There's like 1 billion people using it now. And the way that we used to make decisions about whether we were going to launch a feature or whatever was it was a small team, relatively. There were 2 product managers who worked on Gmail and 3 designers. And our sort of rule was, if one designer and one product manager agrees that something's ready to ship, then we can ship it. And in that way, we were able to kind of quickly come to consensus. And that only really worked because of the dynamic among all of us. There's a lot of trust among all 5 folks. But in terms of making like a product or design decision, it was that simple. And that was really freeing and allowed us to make decisions quickly, allowed us to move. And I often think back to that as like, okay, that was a weird system, because it wasn't like there was one decision maker. It wasn't like, there was like a whole, like voting system or anything, but it worked. And I think that that's kind of a model that teams need, where we know how decisions are made. When I've seen they because we know how. So yeah, that's kind of some of the thoughts and like memories that article brought up for me.
Yeah, I think that there are a couple of things that you said there that I want to touch on. And number one would be that you're talking about, okay, so most teams are talking about these potentially costly decisions that they have to make, that the outcomes could potentially be pretty costly if it doesn't work out.
One of the things maybe people mixing, not knowing how costly or not costly they are. So it's if you have a big long discussion about something that's not costly, that sucks.
Exactly. And I think that like there are such simple little hacks as well to get people to understand what the decision they're making is and how much weight it is. And having something really basic like an effort impact scale has helped us like crazy. Just like literally a chart, the y-axis says effort, the x-axis says impact or whatever you want. And you just say, okay, this feature, write it on a Post-it, or this thing that we would have to do, write it on a Post-it. Now, us as a team, do we think that this is high or low effort? Do we think that this is high or low impact? There's a little bit of discussion, but you can stick it up, you can make it tangible, and it makes decision making so much more simple. And I think that when you're talking about costly decisions, that's one way, obviously, to look at it. But a lot of teams, they are not talking about things that are costly decisions, and they're getting bogged down in very, very small details that maybe don't matter. If you think about a Facebook ad campaign, this is a recent example that I saw in person. A Facebook ad campaign, one way you can do it, or one way you can approach it, is to think of a really good piece of creative, think of some really good copy, and put it up there, target your market, and put some money on it, and just see what happens. The other way of doing it, which is actually more successful, is to make about 10 okay-ish campaigns, which you don't know are going to work. You're like, these 10, we don't know how much is going to work. Let's put like $200 on each one and see what happens. And then over the next 2 days or over the next 3 days, you can see which ones perform. It's essentially like an A/B test, and you can stick to the one that actually works without having to discuss anything or without having to have a subjective discussion. And I think a lot of companies, a lot of teams, that's a very, very simple solution to go for, which is a very cheap and fast test. That would be a situation where you could talk about it for 3 weeks, you could talk about it for 2 months, but instead you could just make a decision to go for everything, and that's actually less costly, because you have to remember you're also paying people salaries to sit around and talk about this, and that's like a very, very simple example. But when you come to a product feature, it does get a little bit more intense, deciding on what sort of a product feature to roll out. And I think, like you said, having an explicit system, especially when a team comes to a stalemate, having a really explicit system for making decisions is important. And some of the best situations I've seen, let's say situations where we haven't been involved in making the decisions, were when sometimes just somebody in the room is a strong enough leader or a strong enough person to say, I think we should do this and I'm willing to take the responsibility for the outcome. And this is, for me, sometimes you see teams who have people like that on it, and these teams are just working at such a higher level than other teams within the same company even. I work with the Football League of Germany here, and the CEO of the digital department is someone who just makes decisions extremely quickly on intuition without necessarily needing to know 100% from every angle of whether this is going to work and whether it's not. And this allows them to iterate so quickly. It's crazy. The amount of time that they could spend talking about it and the amount of time that they actually then take to make the experiment, it really, really doesn't make sense then to let's say, try every single avenue and have every single discussion. So I think that for sure you're right. A lot of that article in particular might not be talking about very important, big, weighty decisions. But I think that companies do need to get in the habit of making decisions and not putting things off, because you need training. You need decision-making training. And that decision-making training also happens when you're trying to decide which meeting room to use. And it also happens when you're trying to talk about which Post-its to buy. I see it in Aj&Smart, especially when new people join. You see people getting caught up in conversations about what kettle should we buy, or which brand of tea, or where should we put this thing in the office? And you know, you see these conversations happening, you're like, oh my God, we're supposed to be a decision-making company, and it even happens here. And I think you need to attack it at all levels. This decision-making, let's say, paralysis, or this inability to realize that a decision is not being made. You need to have that like at the back of your mind or the front of your mind all the time, that conversations shouldn't just drag on without any system or without any person who's going to be able to say, I'm going to make a decision right now. And we used to work like that at Aj&Smart. We used to sit down for like 2 hours just talking things out and nothing used to happen. And now we are very explicit about how decisions are made and we just make them. But even at our company, it still happens.
Well, you do need impatience, and you need high standards if you're going to make good decisions. And I was thinking as you were talking, I was kind of trying to list out in my mind what are the elements that make a good decision-making system, because I really think a system is important. We have decision-making systems that we all use like as individuals, and a lot of times they might be implicit. We might not think about what the YouTube folks, you just got a little treat. Jonathan has a crazy leprechaun mug. If I gave that to you, that would have been offensive, but you have it yourself. That's
would have been very offensive.
So we have these systems already, right? Like if you are choosing what kind of coffee to get, you have a system in your head. If you have if you're choosing, I don't know, toilet paper, whatever, like you probably have some system in your head for how you make those decisions. You might not have listed it out, like written out what it is, but we all follow some kind of criteria and some kind of like decision tree for things. And I think that with teams, what I always looked for and tried to recreate as I saw in my career, teams that made decisions really well and teams that struggled, you need to like have a lot of options. So it's really important that you consider the options at once. That's something we try to recreate in the design sprint. But you need to be clearly like, okay, here are the options. Like list them out. You need to have some kind of it's healthy, I think, to have an argument about the options. So if somebody feels strongly about it, you've got to have or an argument. I mean, I want people to like actually, say, this is the reason you should do this one. Here's why I believe it'll work. That's helpful. So options, a little bit of a discussion or argument about those options. It's really important to have a decider to know how a decision will be reached. And ideally it's just one person. And so you present those options, the decider looks at the options, here's the argument firsthand. Then the decider makes a fast decision. So like the fourth thing is like it has to be fast. And then I think it has to be transparent. I think that helps the team understand how to make better decisions in the future, how to present better options in the future, how to understand what's going on. That whole process being transparent, I think, is really helpful and healthy. And then if you can collect, if you start to do that, and then hopefully you get data about whether that decision worked, and you start to think of the system for decision making as a thing, like that was a decision-making tool that we used for a big feature. And then you can kind of evaluate, how did that system work? Because in most situations, if you get together and you try to make a decision about something and there's no system, I mean, there is a way that you're making decisions, like you're talking each other to death or whatever, but it's not explicit and people can't see the mechanism working. And so even if it's a decision-making process for deciding how should we launch this new feature? Should we build this new feature and launch it? Or should we run this marketing campaign? Or should I change jobs? Or where should we go to lunch? Like all of those things could have a different decision-making system. But when you make the system explicit and you look at it and then you can see how it works from launch to launch, I think that becomes really healthy for a team because they can improve over time and they can see where things break down. And of course, like you and me, we're big time geeks about process. Like we're really into like thinking about how those systems work. A lot of people don't really want to think about that stuff. So, we have the design sprint, like the lightning decision jam. There are tools out there people can just take off the shelf and try out and use for making those decisions. But I think it's not enough to say, hey, just make faster decisions. Like that's not always like you can't skip the ingredients of a good decision and just say, like, screw it, let's do it. Like you do have to consider your options, consider what you're trying to accomplish, and then have some kind of a feedback loop, or you're just running very quickly from this. My colleague Daniel Burka used to say, like you're running really fast from like driving a car from ditch to ditch. Like that feels fast, but if you're not not actually on the right track, it's not productive.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of the cautionary, I think, the cautionary asterisk on the end of that.
Yeah, I there was so with building this training team, there was a situation that came up a few weeks back, I guess in December, where the training team was discussing about how do we deal with, when we were doing a workshop with you and in the European tour, when we were partnering.
How do we deal with this prima donna?
How do we deal with that goddamn? Yeah, basically we were asking ourselves, or the team was trying to work on, okay, how should the posters and how should the advertising collateral look when somebody else is hosting us, right? Because then there's three parties involved. It's Aj&Smart, it's Jake Knapp, and it's another party who's involved. Okay, how do we communicate that to the people who are hosting us? Because obviously the hosts, we in some cases expect them to give us the venue for free or something like that. So we want to be able to give something back. And essentially what needed to come out of that meeting was, here's how we talk to them. Here, like essentially, here's the language we use, and here's the two tiers that exist. You know, the people who give us everything for free, or the people who just give us the location. And here's also how that looks like on our collateral. Here's how we present that when we push out our Facebook ads, whatever. This was a perfect example of a scenario where, even though a decision could have been made pretty quickly, nothing happened, and it dragged on for days and days and days and days and days, until eventually it reached a point where I was pulled in to figure out how to solve it. And in that case, what I figured out, the reason that no decision was being made is because the roles weren't necessarily clear. There was no one person who could say, just let's do this, you know, because I also hadn't made those roles very clear. And I think that's something that really, if the roles aren't clear, you don't personally necessarily feel responsible for having to make that decision, and you don't feel empowered to be able to move forward. And I think that's something I learned pretty intensely then in that scenario. Something that could have been solved in the space of potentially 30 minutes went on for, I think, maybe 5-6 days. And this is something that happens everywhere in every company. Conversations like this keep getting pushed back and back and back. And I think it's it's scary to think that even in a company like ours, who, you know, we do teach these systems, that we also have blind spots when we set up new teams that we didn't even think about. Like the fact that roles need to be extremely explicit so that people understand how not to stand on each other's toes. And that's also a reason why people have trouble making decisions in companies as well. Just this not being transparent about what decision-making power each person actually has. So this is a huge
deal. Yeah, this is, and maybe the simplest hack to improving your decision-making on your team is to figure out who is the decider, and then make it really clear to that person, you are the decider for this stuff. You know, like you make the call. How do you, to bring it kind of full circle, bring back to you thinking about what you're doing in the coming year and the coming few months, how are you doing anything differently with that team? Have you said like, hey, so-and-so, you are the decider for everything, or you're the decider for this class of thing? What are you doing with your knowledge?
So what we did was, after that event happened, after that mistake happened, we went and we did a workshop, or a very, very quick exercise where I wrote the 3 roles on the walls. So we have product owner, we had business owner, and we had head of experience, the head of training experience. That all the job role names in Aj&Smart are totally random and don't have a lot of deep thought behind them. So that's what the job titles were then. And what I asked was for everybody to write on individual Post-its what they thought were all of the different things that would have to happen, and all of the different responsibilities that would have to happen for us to hit our goals by the end of 2018. So this was literally everything from finding sponsors, calling companies, you know, every single thing, ordering the catering, things like that. So literally everybody write every single task that they can possibly imagine. And then what we did is we put these, first of all, everybody just put them where you think they're supposed to go. And then we asked her, is there anything that's not where it's supposed to be? And very simply, within 30 minutes, we were able to see, okay, so the product owner, you're responsible for everything in this area. So if something comes up related to, and in this case, it would be the education material, you don't need to ask anybody for permission. You can just do it. Even if the others don't agree with you, you can do it. In the case of the sponsorship, what came out was that's actually, in this case, it was Venla's ownership. So she can now make that decision without having to ask anybody. And this, I think at least, is going to be a big deal in terms of, moving that team forward. Maybe what that team is missing right now is still some clarity of who gets the tiebreaker. If there's something that really crosses boundaries, right now that's me. And I want to not have that tiebreaker. But right now, that's what it's like. And there are other teams within Aj&Smart where we've had to do that same exercise. We did it on the product team. Because we have a product owner and we have the head of the product team. The head of the product team is more responsible for hiring and dealing with basically dealing with the employees, whereas the product owner is responsible for how the quality of our product work is going, and actually keeping track of that and making sure the quality is high as possible. And this was also something that, we had to do that exercise for, because there was a lot of decisions it's not that they were any arguments or anything. It was just that decisions were getting put off, It's like, okay, we basically need a nice onboarding system for new designers so that they have a really easy way to understand our principles for when you work with us for product design. And this has been put off and put off and put off and put off because no one was really responsible for it. And I thought it was just that they weren't making decisions, but actually it was also my fault and Michael's fault because we didn't just say, this is something you have to make the decision on. So this is something for me, big learning this year, actually making the roles extremely clear so people feel empowered to make decisions. Can I say one more thing real quick? In this
Of course you can.
In this Ray Dalio book, he talks about an app that and I saw a video of them using it in a meeting. It's an app called Dot Collector. And Dot Collector is an app that people use in that company, Bridgewater Associates. I'm hoping that's actually the name. In that company, Bridgewater Associates, everybody has
Ray, if you're listening and
sorry,
John
Ray.
got it wrong, you can email him directly.
At least I got your name right. And so the idea
Dot Collector.
Everybody's sitting down in a meeting. So the way they work there is that they're radically transparent and they're very open about, confronting each other. And so you can go, I'll just give you an example that he showed on his TED Talk. So Ray Dalio, TED Talk, really great. He shows the Dot Collector app. Everyone's sitting around in a big meeting, maybe 30 people in the room discussing, right? A relatively open discussion, but they're trying to make some decisions about what the company is going to do. And this could be complete chaos. And what the Dot Collector app does is that while somebody's talking and while somebody's arguing, everybody else in the room has the opportunity to rate how good their argument is, or how good their discussion is, and what they think, how well backed up it is, and how well they're bringing it across. And he gives a great example of this new intern who had just started, and she rated him like a 2 out of 10 because she thought his arguing was a bit messy and everything. And then you can zoom out and you can see how everybody rated and commented on this person's argument. And so you get the full picture of the entire room of what people think about this person's argument, and everybody's rating it, and there's all these crazy things that looks completely insane. And at the very end, then you essentially have a rating system for how well everyone's arguments went. And they use this as a basis for making some decisions. I thought it was really interesting. It seems very brutal because they are asking you to say, that someone is, you just sound really stupid right now. That makes no sense. Things like that. You see that he shows a couple of emails that they send each other in the company. But I do think this almost aggressive upfrontness when they're talking about making important decisions is important as well, because a lot of decisions are not made because people are afraid of a conflict and they're afraid of insulting other people. And I have that problem too, right? And I think that was something that came up this year a lot. I think I put off some decisions because I knew it would hurt someone else's feelings to tell them why I made that decision. So I think that, well, I rambled a lot there, but I think that things like that things like that are really interesting, putting in technology to get over those things.
Yeah, I think that the thing I always think with things like that, like it's an extreme example, and it's interesting because it sounds like they're doing something. I haven't actually don't know anything about it except what I just heard you say, but it's an extreme example, and I think that when you listen to that example, you can think one of two things, like, oh, it's cool, I want to like emulate that in some way, or the other one is like, oh God, that sounds horrible, like I don't want to work there. Like it might might, even if they have to like work in that environment. I think that there is a way to do both. Like it is possible to have a good environment and make smarter decisions. And that idea of systematizing how you make decisions is a way to get there, to make it clear why you're doing the things you're doing. It's going to be interesting to see as we do our stand-ups how if the decision making evolves on that new team.
Yeah.
And how you're applying some of this stuff. But we should probably wrap it up because I think this was originally, we aimed for 30 minutes and I think we're like at 6. But last podcast was 2 hours. So this is a lot closer to 30 minutes.
Damn right. We aimed for 30 minutes. I like it. So Jake, where can people find you on the beautiful internet and tell you how much they love or hate the podcast?
They can find me at jakeknapp.com. You can find me there and contact me through there. You can also Twitter me at JakeK, Jakek.
Nice. You can.
How about you? What about you? What about you?
You could.
What about you?
You can find me at JIceCream on Instagram. Instagram's the only social platform I check more than like 3 times a week. I don't really enjoy going on Twitter, so you can still find me on Twitter at JIceCream. But Instagram's where it's at. Send me a DM. Tell me if you like it. If you know what a DM is, say hi. And there's every like once a week I do a topless update, and this is not a joke. Once a week, it's me topless on Instagram. Jake's face.
I can't believe this.
Me topless on Instagram talking about business stuff. And it's not that I'm actually topless and planning this. It's just that when I'm sitting around the apartment here, sometimes it's really warm and I'm topless and I'm like, oh, something interesting happened. Topless update. So those are important.
Wow. Wow. This just took a weird turn right at the end. Okay.
Yeah, I could take off my top
week,
right
everybody.
You want me to
Nope, I'm good. I'm good. Let's stop the podcast right now.
All right, Jake. See you next week, man. Boo!
All right, see you.
Oh, please rate us 5 stars on your iTunes or something. Fuck it.
Yeah, you have to, because somebody rated us 2 stars and we don't have that many 5-star ratings.
What?
So yeah. Yeah.
Did someone rate us 2 stars?
I mean, they had a good point. We ramble, which we just did. We just totally rambled a bit. But
Jake,
you know what? If you're listening, if you like the rambling, or even if you don't, if you just want to make us feel good, 5-star rating would be awesome.
I know you're not supposed to
maybe
say
a little review.
I know you're not supposed to say this, but you know what? If you don't like the rambling, just don't listen to the podcast.
Yeah, I know. I've been thinking about this a bit lately. Topic for a future podcast is writing. Yeah, why do people write reviews that are negative? Just don't.
Such a hassle.
Hey, just don't listen. Just don't. Keep reading. Just stop reading if you don't like it.
I posted something on Instagram the other day about our the podcast from last week, and it's a picture of you and me. I know this is. I hope this person's not listening, but I posted a picture. It's myself and you sitting down in our office, and I'm interviewing you, and I have my legs crossed, kind of like this kind of weird crossing, whatever. And most people were happy, and they were like, "Yeah, that's great, whatever." And then one person's like, "I don't like the way your legs are crossed." Just fuck off.
What?
Come on.
Seriously, I mean, come on.
The internet is the worst place on the planet.
It's the worst place. Why do we spend so much time there?
But Instagram's usually fine. I mean, I just, yeah. Anyway, I'll never do that with my legs ever again. Thank you. And I'm really paranoid about it. Bye, Jake.
See ya.